So one of the decisions we always have to make is what proportion of our budget is covered by the taxes that everybody pays versus what portion is covered by the people who actually use that service. You know, when it's police or fire, it's pretty much all covered by taxes, which makes sense because you don't know when you're going to need it and no one has to take out their credit card when you call 911. For transit, most big cities typically have about a half and half. So about half of it comes from the fare box and half comes from general property tax because there are lots of benefits to transit that accrue to people who don't ride transit. Less congestion, less air pollution, social mobility, and so on. So every 4 years we go through this discussion about what do we make more user fee, what do we make more property tax. And that's really the conversation that we're having today. Now, interestingly, in this long conversation, what's being recommended is roughly what we do now. But it is an important conversation for us to have to dig up under those rocks every time.
What about the balance? And I think of something like transit user fees, transit fares. There has been declining ridership, but at a certain point you raise it to a point where people say, I will look at other options.
Yeah, there's two problems, particularly with transit, because there's a huge societal benefit to people taking transit. So as an organization, you want to encourage people to take transit. The challenge with transit, and I'm really going to be Professor Mayer for a second, is that it's very, very difficult to manage the elasticity of demand. Because there are, for example, folks who work downtown who might take transit because they don't want to deal with
I think we're good.
We're talking about elasticity of demand.
Okay. This all comes down to this concept of elasticity of demand, which basically means as you increase the price, do fewer people use the service. And every time you do any kind of pricing anywhere in the world, you want to know what the elasticity of demand is. The challenge is that in transit, you have very different user groups. So you might have someone who is coming downtown, who has a job downtown, who's primarily using transit, even though they own a car, because of the convenience, because of the price of parking, because of congestion. And that person would have a relatively high elasticity. So if you increase the price above the price of downtown parking, they might change their mind, okay? On the other hand, you have transit users who may not be able to drive, for whom this may be the only choice. They have to take transit. There's no other way to get to work. And if you increase the price really high, they've got no choice but to pay it. But you may actually be really causing a lot of problems in that person's life. And so that's really fundamentally the kinds of things that we have to balance off. It's not easy, but most big cities have come to the conclusion that if you get to about a 50% level, that's about right. The challenge we've got with Calgary Transit now is as ridership has declined, we've gone above 55%, just slightly above 55%, which is getting to kind of the limits of what we would want to see. And the answer here is not really, in my opinion, it's jacking up fares. It really is about increasing ridership.
So how does the city increase ridership in a sluggish economy? Most of Jeff Fielding suggests that regularizers are looking at other options, which I suppose Car2Go, Uber.
Yeah, the biggest thing on this one is the philosophy we've taken is if you build it, they will come. So if you actually have more convenient transit to more places, you can increase ridership. So this fall, we will be rolling out the bus rapid transit network, most of which doesn't bring people downtown. So our system has been hugely successful on funneling people to the downtown. And the BRT system will help people get to and from work and school without necessarily coming downtown. The best example of that is the North Crosstown BRT, which will take people from Northeast Calgary to work and school at the University of Calgary, say, Foothills Hospital. And so those are all ways of increasing ridership. The biggest ridership increase, I believe, from the BRT network will be the next phase of BRT when we build the 52nd East BRT, which will really help get people to and from work in the industrial areas in East Calgary.
Could that result in cost savings such that you don't have to look at hitting the fare box?
Well, it should result in ridership increases, so increased revenue. But when you build it, of course, you don't save cost, you increase cost. And so that's the balance that we have to make.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Now you're getting super technical, with one exception. When you build LRT to replace BRT, then you reduce the operating cost. But the capital cost is very, very high to do that.
I was thinking reallocation in terms of, there's a complete redesign of the routes.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the midst of going through, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of time to talk about a really radical redesign of bus routes as the BRT network comes in this fall. But the reason we're doing that is, there'll be some savings on the margins, certainly. But you also have to fund the very frequent BRT service to make it work. So I don't see huge decreases in costs there.
On transit, do you think these numbers actually translate in a 4-year budget annual increases, or do you think there could be an increase every 2 years, for example?
Probably be small annual increases. A lot of people say to me, why would you increase to $3.15 or $3.20? Just go to $3.25, to use a recent example. And that's something that we are always kind of bouncing around. I prefer having smaller increases rather than saving them up and then people having to have a real big hit.
And the provincial funding for the transit pass program expires in a year. What does the city intend to do after that provincial money?
This has been one of the most successful programs we've ever had, not just because the demand has been so much higher than we thought. And that's not because of the economic slowdown. The easy analysis is, more people are out of work, therefore more people are using the low-income transit pass. You don't get laid off from your job in Suncor and go to 50% of the poverty line. That just doesn't happen. So what's really happened is that we have, by offering this low-income pass, we have discovered a whole bunch of Calgarians that we just didn't know. People who were really isolated in their neighborhoods who now have the opportunity to get around the city. And for me, that is a vital service. And I will continue to make the case, both to my council colleagues, but also to the provincial government, that this is a really important thing and we've got to keep doing it.
Have you put that request to the province yet?
Of course.
Finally, a date set for the bridge dedication. So you don't have to say soonish anymore.
Yeah, so soonish, a week Saturday, I think, is the date. I'm really happy about this. We finally managed to get many different stakeholders together to make this gesture of reconciliation on behalf of the citizens of Calgary, and I'm really pleased about it.
Why did it take so long?
This is all about respect, and it's all about working with people to do what's right for them. So we really wanted to make sure that we were involving all the stakeholders in a way that was deeply respectful of tradition, of knowledge, and of background, and so I'm really pleased at the way it's come out.
Was there perhaps too much of a focus on timing it with a particular date, a significant date, as opposed to at what point can everybody be on the same page?
No, not really. Our thought had been to do it around the activities around Indigenous Awareness Week in June last year. That didn't work out, and then it just became a matter of how can we make it work. But we had an election, and you didn't want to do it during all of that. You want to do it when the weather is nice. So with all of that, this actually works out really well because there's actually going to be some refurbishment on the bridge over the course of this summer. So it's nice to get this properly done before that happens.
Oh, tell us about that.
That's all I know. I think a new coat of paint.
Can I just ask you a question on a story we're doing today?
Of course.
Just,
Hi, by the way.
Long time no see. We're talking to a man who's had 25 years experience in oil and gas here, unemployed for 3 years, and now he's moving to Dubai, and he's already relocated there, now waiting for the family to relocate there, just with this Trans Mountain delay. Is this kind of a fear? Is this maybe the new reality? What do you think?
Calgary's history has been one of population growth and population decline. Sometimes you think of the price of oil actually being an index for when people move in and move out. Price of oil goes up, people move in. Price of oil goes down, people move out. And we actually didn't see very much of that in this economic downturn, far, far less than we normally would have. When we look at previous downturns, even as recently as the 08-09, people actually left Calgary, net. And we only saw a teensy bit of net out-migration this time around. And in fact, we saw population growth every year through this decline, which has never really happened in Calgary before. So what we're really seeing is people are making bets on the future of Calgary. They're saying, I might not get the same job I wanted before, but maybe I'll be an entrepreneur, maybe I'll try something new, or maybe I'll move into a slightly different field. We're seeing a lot of very skilled technical people do a little bit of retraining. I'm already an engineer, but maybe I need to learn a little bit more about software, for example. So that's actually gone really well. And one of the things that makes Calgary work is the fact that we've got mobility of talent. So if people actually want to go away and get some great experience for a few years and then come back, that's actually not a bad thing. And certainly when our population was really going gangbusters, I was making that case to other people. Jason Kenney went to Ireland and said, well, the economy is poor here. Come to Calgary for a few years, get some work experience, come back. So I think that kind of mobility ultimately helps us. Though, in my mind, I'd love to make sure all those people have jobs right here.
And your thoughts on how Morneau is talking about Trans Mountain compared to our Prime Minister?
I feel like we're becoming a one-story world here on this. I felt like I talked about that a lot yesterday. Listen, it is very, very clear that Premier Horgan's strategy here was never to win a court case. It was he knows he's not going to win that court case. I'm sure he knows that. But it was to cause enough delay and uncertainty to scare away the investors. I think that's particularly unethical political behavior, and I'm very, very pleased that the federal government is stepping in saying, well, here's an investor who won't be scared away.
Is it the right measure of action, or were you hoping for more?
No, it's exactly what I thought they ought to do, so I'm pleased to see that's what's happening. I don't know, none of us know how much money we're talking about, what indemnification as opposed to investment means. But that said, I think the concept of backstopping to prevent investor uncertainty is actually a very good strategic move on the part of the federal government for a project of national interest.
So Brad Stevens indicated that with the winding down of MSI, that means already there'll be less money for infrastructure projects in years 3 and 4. How significant an impact could that be?
We spent an enormous amount of money during this economic downturn because, as I always say, that in the fable of the grasshopper and the ant, we are the rare government that was the ant. We put some money away in good times. We leveraged funding for infrastructure so that we could put a lot of money into the economy during the economic downturn. So given that, I don't think anybody expected that we would maintain the level of stimulus spending forever. Of course, there is unfunded infrastructure, and I would whatever money we get, we can spend on things Calgarians need. That said, we're also aware that, we have to be part of the economic solution for the province, so we're expecting to have a little less capital funding going forward in the short term. That said, the new fiscal framework that we're negotiating as part of the charter needs to have long-term predictability and stability for capital funding in it. So whatever replaces the MSI needs to be something that we can count on, because what we cannot do is have wild swings in our capital budget. When you're a big city like this and you're building mega multi-year projects, you have to have some certainty over numbers of years.
So too early to say what you might have in 3 and 4. Presumably there'll be some new arrangement with the province.
There has to be.
Does that uncertainty, though, does it create, in terms of making a 4-year budget document at this time, does it create, a little more stress and strain in terms of figuring out what infrastructure projects you can do in year 1 and 2 that you know about?
Yeah, the good news about the capital budget is, while it's big money, it is also relatively flexible. So we can set up our spending plan for years 1, 2, 3, 4, but in year 2 it's relatively easy to change years 3 and 4. The operating budget is much less flexible because you're hiring people. And the good news on that is that very, very little of our operating budget money comes from other orders of government, and that is really under our own control.
And some side discussion there of the field house, is that a project that you think can be funded in the next 4-year budget?
I'd really love to find the money for this project. It has been long our largest unfunded social infrastructure piece. And I'd love to be able to figure out how to do it. The challenge with that one is very expensive, and particularly building the big field house at Foothills, which is the plan, is an expensive project. And I would like to see a lot more indoor soccer and indoor track opportunities, not just one big field house, but throughout the city. So finding the money for all of that is challenging, but it remains a priority for me.
Will that be a discussion this fall?
Oh, I think certainly. I think when we're looking at the recreation list, we have to figure out a way to get to that field house.
I say that because it's been at the top of the list for some time, but like you said, it is a big ticket item.
Well, and let's not forget, we built a lot of stuff, right? So we built these 4 major rec centers, which were ahead of the field house on the list. But now that those are done, it's time for us to, 1, figure out what our next big recreation investment is, and 2, where we're going to get the money.
So if that's a very expensive project, and you'd like to see more facilities throughout the city, how supportive are you?
You're presaging an interesting debate this fall. But,
How supportive are you of a new field house?
Oh, I think we need one. No question.
So it's not either or.
I'd like to do it all.
Okay, but as Brad says, the reality is...
Well, the question is, too, are there any ways in which to scale back the Foothills Fieldhouse a little bit and and free up some money for other facilities across the city? I just don't know the answer to that yet. But given that we're having this very interesting, I'm just going to throw something completely new at you because you're bored, right? Given that we've had this interesting announcement about soccer at Spruce Meadows, which is a really interesting idea, what does that mean in terms of our requirements for the Foothills Fieldhouse? And I don't actually know the answer to that question, whether that changes or not, but I'd like to know more about what they're planning down at Spruce.
Isn't the key one indoors versus outdoors?
Yes, but on the other hand, one of the things about the Foothills Fieldhouse is a lot of seating. And so, who knows, maybe that will no longer be required for summer season. I don't really know, I'm just throwing that out there. But since you're bored today, I'll throw something out at you.
We saw a little bit of pushback from council members who aren't on that Olympic committee, a little bit around the agenda, partly because there was a lot in that agenda about what the work plan is for the next few months.
Yeah.
And we keep hearing that there's so much to do. We're on an escalated meeting pace. What was important to communicate to the council members who are concerned about the Olympic file?
Well,
who
just
don't
that,
sit on the committee?
just that really, that council has chosen to delegate some of its authority to this committee. And we have to, as I've said a few times now, we have to give the committee the oxygen to get its work done, keeping in mind that the important decisions will, of course, remain council decisions. And I think the vast majority of council, after we kind of had this final discussion about it, has gotten that.
So it's not like if you're a member of council who's not part of the 7, you should probably come to that committee anyways?
Everyone's always welcome.
Just a comment about the pace that you see laid out in the work plan. It seems like a fairly jam-packed 6 weeks coming.
It really is. I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to get to those financial details in June. When I look at it in the work plan, I start to get a little nervous that all these moving parts, especially with the other orders of government, might not be able to deliver what we've been hoping to deliver by June. And if that does happen, then we'll have to have a conversation about how and when that slips.
And the other question I wanted to ask you about that in particular is, okay, so you get a revised operating and capital budget for what a Calgary Olympics would be. But can council actually vote on whether to bid or not to bid without getting the commitments from the federal and provincial governments of how much they would put towards it?
Yeah, I would argue no. And that's really my concern, is that a budget has two sides, right? It has the expense side, but it also has the revenue side. And it's almost nonsensical to look at the expense side without understanding what the revenue looks like, and vice versa. So that's my concern, that we won't be able to quite get there in June, which is what I've always been hoping for. But I think we have to look at both sides before council makes a decision.
So given that you're relying on that information coming from the federal and provincial governments, and we all look back at how long it took them to commit to $10 million apiece for a bid corporation, any concerns that vote just may get delayed and delayed and delayed? Are we bidding? Are we not bidding?
Yeah, I am a little bit concerned about that, but ultimately, since council has decided on a plebiscite, we have to get to the plebiscite. And to me, if we do a plebiscite too late in the process and we've spent all the money already, it's not the opportune time to do that. So we have to work backwards from that date as well. So it's all pretty complicated, but I'm hopeful that we still have enough time to do it all.
So to conclude then, for me, the latest that you would say council can vote, bid or no bid, when would that be? Is that end of July when the council rises for the summer?
No, I think it could be as late as early in the autumn. It's not ideal, but I think that could well happen.
Okay.
Is that the gist, that we would just kick the off-ramp down the road?
Yeah, I think you have to, because I think legitimately you can't have a plebiscite and you can't have a council decision unless you really understand the money. And you've got to understand the money in and the money out. So until we have that, it would be difficult to be able to move forward. I mean, there's still lots of work to do, because the bid book work still would continue, but it would be very helpful for clarity to have those numbers as soon as possible.
Any concern that opponents would say, this is all part of the strategy, kick it down the road, we're actually going to bid?
As I keep saying, I wish I had such a grand strategy person. No, it's just, again, you're seeing the sausage being made in public, and we'll continue to do that.